Our scripture this morning is Luke chapter 2, verses 1 through 7. Now in those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that a census be taken of all the inhabited world. This was the first census taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria, and everyone was on his way to register for the census, each to his own city. Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the city of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and family of David, in order to register along with Mary, who was engaged to him and was with child. While they were there, the days were completed for her to give birth. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and she wrapped him in cloths and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. We look at that passage and we know it very well. We read it every Christmas. We look at that and we know about the census that was decreed by Caesar Augustus. That census message went out to all of the governors in plenty of time. They sent the message out through the direction of all the regional officers, and they posted that message. Everyone must register for the tax. And with the Roman government, that was a difficult situation for the people of Israel, to be downtrodden, if you will, by this nation that was across the ocean, the Mediterranean Sea, on the other side of that water. They had conquered Syria and Israel, and even clear down into Egypt. They had conquered that. The Roman government was over a vast expanse of land here in the world at that time. And you look at that and you see it and you say Pax Romana, and the understanding that they ruled with an iron fist, and they taxed all of the other nations that they had conquered, so they could live in a wealthy lifestyle there in Rome. We know the history of this situation where Daniel gave the prophecy of the Babylonian and the Medes and the Persians, and then the Greek Empire, and then finally the Roman Empire. He gave the prophecies of all those situations, but Israel was in the midst of all of that, from the Babylonian exile right on up through the rule of Quirinius, the governor of Syria, at this time when Joseph and Mary have to go to Bethlehem. Now, the prophecy had been given that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. In Micah 5, it tells us very clearly that Bethlehem Ephratah, I don't know how to say that the right way, but it was a combined community, if you will, of Bethlehem and Ephrata, or Ephrath. I get my tongue tangled up on that one. Ephrath, or wherever. It was the place where Rachel was buried. When the mother of Joseph and Benjamin, or is it Isaac? I get kind of confused on those. Rachel and Leah, yeah. It was the mother of Joseph and Benjamin. When she died, the beloved wife of Jacob, when she died, she was buried there at Bethlehem. And later on in the history, if you read the generations of Jesus, in Matthew and again in Luke chapter 3, at the end of chapter 3. It tells us that those the descendants of Abraham, from Abraham on, it tells us all of these descendants. But as you look at the story of how Jesus' lineage is connected to David, especially through Mary, then you see that there was a fulfillment of prophecies. David was given a prophecy that a son of his would reign on the earth forever. Forever. There would be no end to his kingdom. Isaiah chapter 9 tells us that he will reign. He will be Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, and there will be no end to his kingdom. He will reign in Jerusalem. The prophecies are there over and over where it tells us that this is where the child will be born. David is the offspring of Obed, Jesse. Obed was his grandfather. Obed is the son of Boaz and Ruth in the story of Ruth. And Ruth is a Moabite. Then you go a little farther back, and Boaz is the grandson of Salmon and Rahab the harlot. They were married. And you look at this story of the lineage of Joseph and Mary as coming down through David, and you see that humanity. God picked that family. And you look at the sons of David. You know, we see Absalom and Abijah, and we hear some of the other stories of his children and the difficulties that were there in the family of David after his sin with Bathsheba. We see how his family was torn apart by dysfunction. But in that story, we are given very clearly that Bethlehem is the city of David. It is the community that is connected to David. And so here, nearly 1,000 years later, after David is king and reigns for his period of time there in Jerusalem, he was the greatest king. Solomon collected the greatest amount of wealth, but David was the king who conquered. He was the man who slayed the giant. He was a great hero to Israel, even still today. The Star of David is their symbol as an Israeli nation. You look at this story and you see how God worked all these things together. And he says it's in Bethlehem. The problem is that Joseph and Mary live in Nazareth. How to get Joseph and Mary to Bethlehem? I don't know if Joseph grew up in Nazareth. There is historical fact of a number of families from Bethlehem moving to Nazareth because of economic situations. Very much like in the Grapes of Wrath when the Oklahoma Dust Bowl, so many of them moved to California and established farms and things there in California back in the 30s. There was this migration of families, and whole communities picked up and moved. Well, very much the same way, a large group of people from Bethlehem had moved to Nazareth and that whole Sea of Galilee area. And so here we are with Joseph and Mary living in Nazareth. How does God get them to Bethlehem in time for Jesus to be born there? At that time, Caesar Augustus sent out a decree that all the world should be taxed. And there was a census for everyone to sign up so that they would know where everybody was and who they belonged to and what family line, and they would get them registered for the tax. He required them to go to their hometown where their ancestors had lived. Now you think about that. If we had that in America when we had the census, what a mess that would be. Because we travel, we move all over the place. And to think, where does our lineage stem from? Where would we go and say, that's our hometown? That's a tough one, because Joseph may not even been born in Bethlehem. He may have been born in Nazareth. We don't know. It does not tell us. But the city that he has to go to register is Bethlehem. So God gets him and Mary down to Bethlehem. And we look at this story and we see that this is how God uses our circumstances to fulfill his plans for us. We look at this and it says very clearly when this happened. Luke gives us a strong timeline there for Quirinius, and for us to understand that was a part of the timing that says that he was to be registered. Now, this census was not the only census that was taken, so that helps us to understand this census is the one when Jesus was born. But they go from Galilee, Nazareth, it's about 70 miles, from Nazareth down to Bethlehem. Bethlehem is between 5 and 7 miles away from Jerusalem, and it is the place of the flocks, the shepherds that are there. We'll get to them later, but the shepherds are the ones that raise the flocks for the temple sacrifices. In the understanding of what Moses was told by God, what was an acceptable sacrifice was unblemished animals, animals that were not sickly, animals that were perfect. And so the shepherds of Bethlehem raised the flocks that were specifically for sacrifice in Jerusalem. And while they were there, it says that the time was completed for her to give birth. Now, it doesn't tell us how long they'd been there. If you've seen the Chosen series with the new release, The Messengers, they aired their Christmas program last Sunday, and now it is available on the app. You can watch it for free there on the app to see that Christmas program. It's really good. But the story shows them walking down the road, and Mary and Joseph are coming toward Bethlehem. And she's obviously experiencing labor pains. And so as they come into town, it's obvious that she needs to have some place quickly. Now, the story really focuses on some of our traditional ideas, and it doesn't really fit with what archaeology tells us, but it makes a really good story of going to like the Motel 6, the inn, and saying we need a room, and being told that there's no vacancies. That's not the way it was. There were a number of places, and if you go back to the message in the Greek of what Luke wrote, he says there was no room for them. It doesn't say in the inn. We add that part because that's what we're expecting. There was just no room. There was all these people in the community, but none of Joseph's or Mary's extended family had room for them. There was no room. And they were ostracized, if you will. But they went to a place where she wrapped him in cloths and laid him in a manger. Now, I've been doing some study. I saw something on Facebook that piqued my interest. And so I started looking, and my goodness, the stories are true. The idea of the Tower of Eder, the Migdal Eder, is the Tower of the Flock of Bethlehem. And the understanding, if you go to Micah 4, it tells us that the Tower of the Flock is going to be a place of might. And when we understand, when the shepherds are told by the angels that they will find the babe wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger, they know instantly where to go. Now, you would think if